Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming here despite your busy schedule. We would like to begin day 2 of ISAP2012 International Forum for Sustainable Asia and the Pacific. Plenary 3 is on climate change, the way forward for climate regime after Durban. This session will be moderated by Professor Akio Morishima, Chair of the Board of Directors, Japan Climate Policy Center. Professor Morishima, please. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We apologize for the late commencement of this session. I was about to say that Dr. Park had a different appointment this morning, a public event. Therefore, he was slightly late. We were waiting for him, but because of these circumstances, we apologize for the slightly late beginning, but we will begin the session at any rate. But before that, thanks to you for gathering here from early in the morning. It seems that today is going to be an especially hot day, but we are experiencing unprecedented climate change. According to Dr. Pachauri, at the probability of 90%, this is probably caused by anthropogenic sources. But thank you very much for coming here despite your busy schedule and despite the hours being very early in the morning. The title of this session is Climate Change, the Way Forward for Climate Regime After Durban. People gathered here are well-known people to consider the regime after Durban, but as the moderator, let me try to set the scene for the discussions to follow. During the keynote session, those of you who were there might have heard Dr. Pachauri mention that in 2007, the fourth IPCC assessment report was published. In the fourth assessment report, it was mentioned that climate change shall occur towards 2100, but before that, the anthropogenic cause, or at the 90% probability, it is mentioned that anthropogenic sources are the causes of climate change. And with the scenarios of temperature rise between 1.1 to 6.5, there could be several scenarios, and taking into consideration the impact, unless we contain the rise of the temperature at 2 degrees Celsius, we will end up experiencing unsustainable impacts in many places around the world. And based upon the assessment report of IPCC, there are ongoing debates on what international measures must be taken. International negotiations are underway. As you know, the first commitment period of Kyoto Protocol began in 2008, and the final year is this year, 2012. And the KP in itself is not participated by the United States, and therefore the KP in itself is not robust enough as an international regime. On top of that, COP15, held in Copenhagen, took up the issue of what to do about after the initial commitment period, post-2013, but no agreement had been reached. And then came Marrakesh, and then the next COP was held in Durban. Unfortunately, no agreement has been reached on what international initiatives ought to be taken. However, at Copenhagen, there had been no prospects whatsoever, but there had been improvement in Marrakesh in that there was consensus built that temperature rise should be halted at 2 degrees. 2 degrees would be 2 degrees meaning post-industrial revolution 2 degrees. So the only room remaining may be 1 or 1.5 degrees from the current level, but at any rate, it is upon the international community to halt the temperature rise at 2 degrees Celsius above the above the Industrial Revolution level, and that kind of consensus, that kind of recognition was shared amongst the participants in Marrakesh, and a few agreements had been reached. That was how far Marrakesh had gone, but last year in Durban, there were hopes for implementation, but it didn't go that far. But Durban platform was established, and a special commission on agreement was established, and at the latest by 2015, agreement is to be reached in order to have a legal regime to be implemented by 2020. That's the plan so far. I am a legal expert, so I want to give you more precise presentation on the current situation, but I don't have enough time. But at any rate, as the backdrop, the major assumption is that temperature rise can only go up to 2 degrees, and in order to control rise of temperature at that level, there has to be a platform for countries to cooperate with each other. But at this stage, we've not come to an answer on how such international cooperation can be achieved. No agreement has been reached. But to date, UNFCCC, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, has Annex 1 countries, developed countries versus non-Annex 1 countries, the developing countries. And there is this bipolarization amongst the parties. On one hand, developed countries, they're common, but there's the common but differentiated responsibility principle between the developed world and the developing world. So there is this bipolarization. Dr. Park, who will be delivering the keynote speech, will first of all give us the general picture. He will say that at the current level of activities in various countries, the rise of temperature will not be halted at 2 degrees Celsius. So there has to be more efforts, and this is what is referred to as emission gap, because the initiatives that are currently being done by countries will lead to rise of temperature of more than 2 degrees. So what ought to be done? That's the first point. And secondly, Mr. Athanasio will take the floor, and he will talk about the fact that under the current UNFCCC,